I would like to welcome you to today's WIFO research seminar. We are very happy today to have Professor Maik Schneider from the University of as today's speaker. He is Professor of Public Economics at the University of Graz. His research is driven by the question of how to create and share prosperity in a globalized world, and how to design political institutions that deliver the highest welfare for all. His research interests are an intersection of public economics, economic growth, innovation, and political economy. Before he was at the University of Graz, he was professor of economics at the University of Bath in the UK. Today we will have a very interesting and topical issue in his talk. He will talk about public policy responses to AI. Your talk should be about 30 minutes, if it's fine for you. And afterwards we have a comment from Maik Schneider. Yes, and as an organizational issue, I have to say that this meeting will be recorded, so I hope this is also fine for everybody. So then, thank you very much. Please, floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation to the WIFO. It's my first time here, and I'm very glad to be here. So the talk I want to give is about basically the intersection of public economics and innovation, technologies, and thinking about public policy to the developments that we see, and motivating. Oh, let's see. And move forward. Well, then I can say this is work joined with. Just press the arrow.
If not, it works with the wire connector.
That's what I try, but. I mean, it worked 5 minutes ago.
Okay.
But it's still.
Maybe it has to do with this window.
The beamer worked. Oh, wow. So weak. So weak.
I mean, I have one. Okay. Well, it is. Well, now it works. Okay. Well, excellent. So technology, right? Always a bit of a surprise. And the surprise in 2020 was this, reported by The Guardian. A robot wrote this entire article, "Are you scared yet human?" And that was a big thing, right? Oh, wow, it's like AI, and they can write entire articles in newspaper. Today, this is completely boring, right? Everybody knows ChatGPT in the 4th generation. And that's already normal. So that's how fast the speed of technology really goes. Then also not only like writing articles, but AI obviously is also calculating very complex problems, finding new solutions. In this case, calculating protein folding, which is an enormously complex task. And then you could find that there was on BBC webpage for a long time, it's probably still there, uses the Frey-Osborne data on whether you're susceptible to be replaced by a robot. So that's mainly robots, where they're looking at routine tasks of jobs and what your probability is to be replaced. The good news for us is, in like working scientifically, we have a relatively low percentage in terms of probability of being displaced. So that might calm nerves. But it looks a bit different for the screenwriters, right? As we saw last year, they on strike, basically arguing that AI shouldn't be used by the film studios to write scripts. And the strike ended about this time last year, November, and they had an agreement that, okay, well, the studios are not using AI, but only the screenwriters can use it. But then, I mean, it's probably not going to last long until that's going to change as well. So the point being that there we are. So point being that there is major change in the labor market ahead, and this is just one example, and just showing for the UK job market what in expectation of PricewaterhouseCoopers here will look like in about the next 20 years. And you see that different sectors of the economy are differently affected. And also, it's not only about replacing people, but it's also creating jobs, right? And we have a differential effect on different sectors. So for example, here, professional, scientific, technical. So that's basically the sector we are in as well. We see a creation of jobs in expectation here of about 33%, but then 18% of the jobs will go. That's the projection here. But then if you look at public administration, defense, well, there you've got job losses of 23% in expectation, only creation of 4%. So they're hit much harder. So there's a lot of structural change going on. Overall, they estimate that about 7 million jobs will go, and about 7 million jobs will also be created in the UK. And then if we think about it, the UK has around 24 to 25 million full-time employees. And that's then about, well, almost a third of the people. But then you're not only taking this third of the people into like these jobs that are newly created, so those who lost them taking into the jobs that are newly created, but it will have knock-on effects, right, all through. So it's probably more than a third of people being affected. The newest study is by the IMF just this year. And they were looking at not only the exposure where people are being displaced, but also the complementarities, right? So there's some sectors where people that are complementary to the new technology actually helps them, and they're able to increase their wages. And here, what you see here is so they distinguish between complementary jobs, so that's high complementary, that's the darker red shade, and the lighter red shade is high exposure, low complementarity, which is basically that you're under risk of being displaced. And here AE is advanced economies, and that basically shows a similar picture as we've just seen in aggregate. So we see that about more than half, almost 60% of people will be affected either way, either going down, being displaced, or going up, being complementary. And that's in terms of the wage, right? And that's a picture that we've seen before, not to that extent, but the development that we've seen before in studies, job polarization, where robots, IT technology, communication technology basically replaced middle wage jobs, like the typical clerk behind the bank counter, and because everybody does online banking then, and then they either got the skills to go into like a higher degree job, or well, they had to find some job in another sector, potentially losing out. And that polarization in the wages, that's what we've seen. There are several other studies arguing that that change of the US wage structure is to a large extent due to as in routine jobs losing out. And there is some new evidence in recent studies about the effect of technological change. So if you lose your job and then you look for another one and you get paid less, then in 45% of the cases, it's due that you don't have the skills for the new technology that's now there in the sector. So you're losing out, and And another study looks at earning profiles, showing that in sectors, especially the IT sector, where technological change is very fast moving, the return to experience declines. Okay, so you have to basically have the skills, then you're complementary, otherwise you will be substituted away. And that link between labor market income risk and the rate of technological change, that's the innovation we bring in our paper. That's what we want to study, and then ask the question as to whether there is a case for public policy. Is this just something we should accept and we should go with it? So is there a case for public policy, and if so, how should public policy respond? And what we find is if we connect labor market income risk and the speed of technological change, so that's basically the key contribution here, we have this uncertainty, and that's really the focus of our study. So there's a lot of literature on, okay, well, there's like the low skilled, they get replaced because they do the routine jobs, and then there's the high skilled and they benefit from it. But then with AI, that's a bit of a different picture, and that's what the IMF report shows as well. Because if you look at, say, journalists, screenwriters, and so on, they're not exactly low skill, really, and they can do difficult calculations. We've seen the protein folding research that AI can do to a certain extent. So that's high-skilled jobs. So we have uncertainty generally, not tied to low and high skill necessarily. And then we have this public policy focus in a simple dynamic framework where we think that we can really have a rich discussion of a variety of different public policies. And what we look at is, private insurance is where people can individually insure themselves. Is that something that's feasible, and is that something that we should do? Universal basic income, that's been much debated around this topic. A robot tax, equally in the public focus. And then we also have reskilling, which we actually singled out to another paper where we have some results. And we can also think about optimal public policy design to respond to it. And what we find is that if we have this link between labor market income risk and the speed of technological progress, the decentralized market equilibrium is inefficient due to the following mechanism. So if you think about if your income risk increases into the future, then you save more, you increase your precautionary savings, right? Okay, if you save more, then, well, it's easier for firms, so the savings, then the investment of the firms, it's easier for the firms to invest, the capital stock of the economy grows, but that capital is not invested in, in the extreme horse carriages, but it's invested in the newest technology, which is, well, AI and robots. To a large extent. So meaning that by saving, by increasing the capital stock, and also there's more investment for R&D, of course, and that actually speeds up the rate of technological progress and technology adoption.
It's a vicious circle.
It's a vicious circle, exactly, and hurts them. They want to protect themselves from it, but actually they're fueling the very development that's going on because they're too small to affect the interest rate or the aggregate capital stock. That's the inefficiency. If they were not, if you were one person, and that's what we have as a benevolent policymaker who would decide on how much to save, would take this effect into account, then we wouldn't have an efficiency, right? And that's okay. It's inefficient. And then the second thing is, of course, well, if we have this job polarization, we're increasing in inequality. So, and those are the two classical market inefficiency, inequality in the distribution, of market outcomes are the two classical motives for the government to intervene. Clear public economic standard motives. So how do we want to intervene then? Well, a benevolent policymaker, as I said, that can prescribe savings would say, okay, well, we can do two things. We can either tax savings so that people don't save as much because they're saving actually too much because they can't influence that mechanism that they're actually increasing investment in R&D and new technology. So we could tax savings, or we lower subsidies on R&D, or we're coming up with an insurance to solve the problem, right? We could also say, okay, well, we can invest. We actually, and that's the key message, right? We actually like the technological progress because it makes our cake bigger. So it's that they save more is fine from an aggregate perspective. We're growing faster, which is great from an aggregate perspective, but we have the distributional problem, right? That many more people will be substituted away, and the inequality will increase. So benevolent policymaker would resort to either of these policies, and then we can think, okay, well, if we were to act now, could we improve the allocation with a private insurance market? Could that solve the problem? We could even think, well, if there is this inequality, if people face this uncertainty, they have an incentive to insure themselves, right? So there could be a motivation, a profit incentive for private insurance to step in and solve the problem. And that's what we're looking at. But what we're also considering, and I think this is very realistic, that it's very hard to verify as to whether you've been replaced because of AI or maybe because of some other reason. Okay, so that verification problem is potentially there. So we have a parameter in there, a probability of mistakes by the insurance, how inefficient the insurance is, and depending on how large the verification problem is, the less you can insure people, of course. So we might end up with a partial insurance only, that individuals can only partially insure themselves, and in that case, we might want to consider a universal basic income. Potentially that can do better, meaning that we, in our case, as we formulated, it's labor taxation that is then redistributed lump sum, so everybody gets the same as in a universal basic income, and that can, in these cases, provide higher welfare, depends on the size of it. But then we also have an issue with the universal basic income is a very blunt instrument. And as you will see in the model that I will show you, well, there's also people, and we've seen that in the IMF, they're actually not affected, right? And that wouldn't necessarily need it, especially young people that, you know, they're in education or working their jobs. It's often older people that are being affected by the new technology, and you're redistributing it lump sum, and in that way you have a redistribution that is relatively inefficient, especially to the young, because, well, if they increase in income, right, then actually, well, they have more money than they save more, and then you're again having this adverse effect. Okay, then a robot tax, that's much discussed. A robot tax in our case is basically a tax on capital. Robots, AI, part of capital stock, right? So if we if we put a robot tax on that, what we're basically doing is we're reducing savings, yes, but we're also reducing technological progress, and we're not doing that much to the inequality itself. Okay, so we're basically saying, okay, well, we don't want the ensuing inequality that comes with a bigger GDP. So we're foregoing that bigger GDP, and we have a little bit less inequality. And the argument we make in this paper is that this should only be a secondary instrument. First, we want to, the actual problem is, it's great that the K increases, that the GDP increases. The actual problem is the increase in inequality by displacement and complementarity. So let's address that directly, and that is what the UBI and the insurance does, and try to increase the GDP rather than say, okay, well, we just refuse to go with this development in full force by taxing the savings here. And then, of course, we can also think about optimal government insurance, where we can bring together, so as I'll show, the private insurance and universal basic income, they have strengths and weaknesses. And we can try to bring together the strengths. In particular, so if we think about it, in our case, with the private insurance, so if people are ex ante, before the uncertainty manifests itself, realizes whether you are being displaced or whether you're lucky and you increase your wage, before that, people are ex ante, in our case, the same. You can vary the probabilities a little bit, but then But if they are more or less the same before the realization of this uncertainty, well, then the only way you reduce this inequality via the insurance is by being able to target those that lost their job. If you have a very imprecise way of paying out your insurance claims, then it's very hard to precisely have an efficient insurance to bring the inequality together. So meaning the verifiability of the payouts is very important. That's not the case at all in the UBI, and that's why it's interesting to look at these two measures. The UBI is exactly the opposite. The UBI just pays out the same to everyone by definition, and the redistribution comes in from the labor tax, that those with a high income pay a higher tax than those with low income, right? So the redistribution happens on the financing side. And then you can say, okay, well, I can formulate an optimal public policy where I bring these two strengths together. So instead of just like bluntly redistributing everything in the UBI to everyone, I might want to target to a certain degree to increase the efficiency of this instrument. Right. There are no questions so far. I give you a bit of a glimpse on the model. So we discuss a little bit more in detail how we've got. So this is the model. It's just one slide. Okay? So it's a standard two-period overlapping generations model. So there's a young generation and an old generation in each period. They live for 2 periods. There's no population growth. I mean, you can bring it in, but it's not necessary here. Households work in both periods. The young, they have labor supply of 1, normalized to 1 when they're young. And then when they go into the second period of their life, so when they grow old, there's this risk as to whether they are being displaced by the new technology. So there's a new technology coming in after the first period, and then they might be displaced, or they're complementary. And that means that their labor efficiency, so their effective labor supply they bring to the table in the labor market, is either psi-S, which is a lower labor efficient labor units, because maybe your skills are obsolete. The new technology requires other skills. So then your productivity goes down, or your complementary, your productivity goes up. That's parameter psi c. And the probability that you're being substituted so that you go to psi s is pt, right? Period t. Probability p, you're going down. With 1 minus p, you're going up. And that displacement, and that's the novelty here in our paper, that displacement probability depends on the speed of technological progress. That is, the faster technological progress goes, the higher is your risk that you're being displaced because your skills might be obsolete. Okay, so this is a household problem. I'm going to skip this. The point to take from here is that if the risk increases, then they increase their precautionary savings. That's a standard result. This is just an illustration of what's happening here. So they're young. They get their wage income, and then they split it between consumption and savings. They get an interest rate on their savings when they're old, and then they can be in two states. As they're substituted away, bad luck. So there you can see their consumption is lower because their labor income is much lower. Savings is the same. They get the same interest rate, of course. And then these guys here in green, they earn much more, and those are the ones that are complementary. So this is what happens here in this model. And then on the technology side, it's very simple on purpose to really focus on the novel point, and that is, so it's basic conductors function. It's a Roma 1986 type production setup, and the key point here is that, well, this is the speed of technological progress, and your probability depends on that proportionally here. And this is the displacement sensitivity, basically how much does technological progress translate into probability of being displaced. Okay, and here we then see, then you can solve for the equilibrium, and then think about a benevolent policymaker, as I said in the beginning. Well, what would a benevolent policymaker do? How would they decide on savings? So we've seen the problem of the households before. How would they now decide? So they would decide exactly, let's see, exactly the same up to this part. So the first order conditional household is exactly the same as that of the benevolent policymakers, except that there is an additional term. And that's exactly that effect that if we save more and we provide more funds to R&D and capital, then the displacement probability goes up. And if that goes up, then we might drop from a utility with high consumption to that of low. So that would be our utility loss. And that's what the benevolent policymaker takes into account. And then this is the classical technology spillover term that's well known in the literature. So the novel thing is this here. And then you see the two policy prescriptions immediately, right? Either I bring the utility when I'm lucky, I'm complementary, I can work well with AI, versus I'm substituted away. If I make that gap smaller, if I even make it to zero, well, then that drops out. Okay, we've solved the efficiency. So that's one solution. The other solution, so that would be the insurance solution. If we insure people, then we'll bring these utilities together. We're making the inefficiency smaller. Or the other idea would be, okay, we're reducing savings, basically, and then we can also reduce this term. Yeah. And that's that vicious cycle that we want to address. We've discussed how we might want to do this. So here's a private insurance market. I think I've said most of these. So these are basically just arrows. Here is a standard way of modeling it. But the key thing which is novel here is that we include this probability gamma, that actually a household who deserves the payment has an insurance claim is said to not obtain the payment because the insurance makes certain mistakes. It's hard to verify. say, okay, well, I'm not sure, but I think this might be wrong. So there's a certain probability that a mistake happens, right? Or that you cannot very well verify whether this was really due to AI or robots that they're being replaced. And on the other side, you might pay out to someone who actually doesn't need it. Okay, so that's the inefficiency, the probability of making mistakes in the verification of the states that they're in. You want to pay only to the yes people. That's what your insurance policy says, but you might not be able to verify it properly. Okay, and then if gamma is a half, then the insurance is basically you're just saving, just standard. It's a random draw. With gamma equals 0, you have full verifiability. You can always say you're making no mistakes, and that's basically a parameter. You can. It's very hard to say exactly how the mistake probability is in reality. People have different opinions, but we can basically include them all in our analysis. And then then we have obviously an insurance price that we can calculate. I'm going to skip the technical part here. So what happens with the insurance then? Just quickly. Well, this is the same, right? When they're young, now they're saving. They can decide as to whether they save by buying insurance claims that pay out a unit of 1 plus RT plus 1 in the next period when they're in state S. So here you see that is from before, without the insurance. That's what we've seen before. Now, with the insurance, well, now they're getting paid more, right? Because the insurance here pays out to people in state S. But also, well, those guys, they shouldn't receive anything because if they only save in these insurance claims, then without mistakes, they wouldn't get anything here. That we have a little bit of mistakes that are being made, so they have something as well. That's when you're in state C, right? And now the household saving behavior is such that you always want to save in the insurance until you're fully insured, and then you save in bonds, okay? Because it always gives you higher marginal utility to reduce the inequality that you expect there to be in old age. Okay, so then with this, we can increase welfare. Growth is being a little bit reduced because we can reduce the uncertainty about the future income, but we will have a higher welfare, but only if the spread between what I get when I'm substituted away and what I get when I'm complementary, if that is not too large, only then am I able to fully insure myself. Otherwise, I will have to buy so many insurance certificates that, well, I have hardly any consumption when I'm young because I have to buy so many that the marginal utility of buying that will be so high that it's not worth reducing the uncertainty in the future. And of course, the verifiability. If it's verifiability is very low, then I need to have a lot of insurance certificates to effectively insure myself. Okay. Yes, I know. How many minutes? -2. -2. Okay, that's good. I will be quick. I will be very quick. Universal basic income. So basically, via labor tax. Here you see proportional labor tax, and then it's just redistributed lump sum. And the key point here to take away is, well, we are redistributing it. So we're paying out the same amount to those that are substituted away and those that are complementary, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, that's fine. That's what we want. We want to redistribute between these two, but we're actually also paying out something to the young, which is what we don't want because they're not affected here. And then if they get something here, well, what they're doing is basically increase their savings. So what we see here is we got an intra-generational redistribution, right? So here, in red is the UBI payment. And what you see here is, you see that redistribution, this is from before without any policy. So here you see with the UBI, those in state S get more, a little bit more than before, and those get a little bit less in state C. So we have this redistribution intra-generational among the old, and that's what we want. That's the insurance. But we also have some intergenerational redistribution. Here you see that it's a little bit higher here for the young than before. So we have some redistribution from the old generation to the young. That's implicit in the UBI. And that's what you see here in this graph, and that makes it inefficient, basically. And it makes it inefficient in the sense that if they have more resources, they will save more, and in this way, again, counteract to a certain degree our measure that we actually want to have to ensure people from the very development that's then again fuel to a degree. But it's the UBI can be well for improving as well, because especially if the intragenerational redistribution effect is a dominant one over the intergenerational. That's the key message to take away. Okay, so then we can compare the two. So here's just a little comparison. Private insurance better than UBI, yes or no? You see here verifiability. Well, verifiability is low. This is if gamma is high, then then you see here in red, these are all different types of equilibria calculated here, simulated with these standard parameter values from the literature, and then delta here is the spread between your income if you're complementary versus when you're substituted away, and then you see. The larger the spread is, well, then you can only partially insure with the insurance, and the UBI has its benefits. Otherwise, you want to go with the insurance.
So you have to provide both things at the same time.
Well, yeah, I mean,
it's not a decision.
That's yes, and that's the discussion on optimal public policy. Then you can bring that together in the public scheme as well. Where you say, okay, well, if you think of it, as I mentioned, the UBI gets a redistributional effect from the financing side, whereas the insurance from the targeting payout side. So if you can bring those together, you have a more efficient instrument, and that would be the optimal, and you have both at the same time, basically. Okay, then robot tax, that's just basically a capital tax here, and we're reducing GDP. So I think that is relatively clear. We're reducing savings, we're reducing GDP, we're reducing inequality to a degree because we're reducing the probability of being substituted away. Technological progress doesn't go at the same speed anymore. It's a little bit slower, so more people can go with it. That's the idea. But then you can argue that that's what we do in the paper, that it's welfare improving if you go for an insurance solution, because the argument is the following: if you reduce economic growth, right, via a robot tax, you're not doing anything to the spread of incomes. If you were to reduce economic growth by the same amount by providing some kind of insurance, say private insurance, we've seen that growth goes down as well. Well, then you have the same GDP, but actually a lower inequality, and that is why robot tax is typically dominated by either of the two schemes. It's dominated by directly addressing the inequality. And then, well, if your GDP is still even larger, then with the robot tax, fine, you're even better off. But even if it shrinks by addressing the inequality directly by some redistribution, even if it shrinks to a certain degree, you're still better off relative to the case where you shrink the economy by that amount without providing an insurance. That's the your argument. Okay, well then I conclude. Okay, I mean, we've provided a tractable model. The key novelty is here this link between endogenous technological progress and income risk that we're looking at. And then we've seen that precautionary savings increase this risk. So we have this vicious cycle that savings and GDP growth are too high. So we have that excessive automation. That's a coin turned by Acemoglu, but for other reasons. But this gives us a novel angle on that. Then we've seen that private insurance and UBI can improve welfare, and we should go for a UBI verifiability is relatively low. The private insurance relatively inefficient. Otherwise, we go with the insurance. A robot tax, that is what we see as a secondary instrument if we can't address the inequality directly. And then, well, we have some further results on reskilling and optimal governmental insurance schemes. And on that note, I mean, this is basically also future research. We're working currently on a follow-up on reskilling because we think there is a lot to say there. We formerly had a little section in this paper on it, but we've taken that out. And then obviously you can have a more elaborate production side, of course. What I find really interesting is political economy implications, if you could bring that in. So that would be really nice, I think. And then, yes, you can also refine it with respect to heterogeneity of abilities and displacement probability. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think it was mine. I tried to be brief, but it's very extensive. I will separate in a model part and economic policy conclusions. Can you please show us first the model outline at the very beginning? When I look at
This one.
This one. Yes, this one. When I look at this is exactly a model you could have used 50 years ago for technological progress on robots. There is no difference because there is a substitution effect, a probability and also a complementary. Some people increase their productivity. So it's exactly like this. What is this time different, and this is out of your model, is before you could influence this probability by investing in your education. Because higher educated people have a lower. This time you cannot. It's by random. You do not know if you showed quite nicely that even high-skilled persons have a higher risk than before to be substituted. This is out of the model, but this is okay. It is, although it's an overlapping generation model, it's still a little bit static. Because if you look at this, after discussion in the 50s, I remind you of the Soul-Off paradoxon, yes. So this reduces a little bit the practical relevance because he said, I can see computers everywhere, but not in productivity. And we saw what happened since. I mean, 2 years ago, we had in our business survey, and this was European-wide, a question, what is your largest obstacle for better production? And it was labor. And 50% claimed there is not enough unskilled labor. So outcome which we would not have imagined. And now we have the next wave. And we have fears, but maybe in the long term we get along because labor will not, there will be always demand. They just shift to other things. I think we have automatic vending machines and even waiter robots. We have some for some while. It's not a problem. Nevertheless, we have still waiters. In care for elderly people also. So some are very much protected, and maybe this was included anyway. What is in the model for the political relevance and is a little bit, it's a closed economy. I mean, you could have kicked out the robot tax much earlier if you remember the tax we had on capital gain tax, because we had always the problem that it will outsource to other countries, yes? And this is another negative point for this. Then we have, I come now to the economic policy conclusions. I have still some more points, but if I do not remember, this is only good. Because, the private insurance. I mean, we have some risk. People are much better aware than if they lose their job to AI or not. For instance, getting sick or getting old. And we know that there is a big myopia in this. Yes, people do not charge it the right way, although it should be easier for them to do so. So the private insurance doesn't even work for health insurance or for pension systems. Yes, so the realization at the policy level is for me hard. Then the minimum income, maybe this is a kind of idea we had already. There were models of how to compensate losers of globalization. We had this because the opening of the economies, yes, increased our welfare via trade. Yes, we could import cheaper things and so. And there were also some points mentioned. For instance, a tax, import tax, which used for compensating the losers of this, so that we can increase our welfare level. So we compensate them. This is a Pareto optimal. They say, nevertheless, if we have more dynamic inside, these people should not locked in forever. So if you are certain you lose your job to globalization, I mean, you have chances. Normally, these models underestimate how flexible people are. They can change their work and so. So in this respect, I would regard this as a little bit static, the model, because the flexibility in the law, you compensate, and that's it. Then it's done. Yes. There's no further step, how to train them to change their job. But it's nice how you show what is more or less, but concerning the realization and the practical, there is the myopia in private insurance. Robotax is anyway a closed economy idea, which is hard to realize in the global context. And then the minimum wages, minimum income is anyway discussed in other areas. So this is concerning the relevance. But from the model, I find it nice that you bring it out. But again, my critique is a little bit, this model could be used before also, but this time it does not show the difference with investing in education, which was relevant in the last model more than in this. Because here, this is maybe exogenous anyway. Looks like when you say, look, skills are losing, maybe you say not for scientists. Wait 5 years, wait 10 years, yes? Maybe this is really, so then your model is even more relevant than before, but this could be shown. So I think I'm at the end. I do not want to use more of our precious time. We should keep some space for questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
You can make a rejoinder, yes, on this. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
This is allowed.
Yeah. So thank you very much for your comments. They're great. So first, I mean, there were plenty of them. So let me start with what is different this time and what relative to like 50 years ago. And I would argue it's the uncertainty. So what we've seen in the literature, and you see a lot of papers in literature about, yes, people being replaced, but then it's typically a low skill, high skill issue. Okay. And now with AI, it's this uncertainty, and this is, you don't see here low skill, high skill, right? I mean, you can bring it in, but this is not one of these stories, right? And with trade, it's the same. You know what you trade, right? You can say from the theory, well, we're probably not gonna trade, just simple products to some African countries. We're providing high-tech products and we're buying raw materials, for example, right? Simply because it's not there. So then you can immediately tell whether the high or the low skill will lose from a certain trade relationship, and that's different here.
That's
okay?
different.
So, but
it makes it harder to opt for in private insurance. I have even less.
I come to the private insurance point, maybe right away. So with the private insurance, I personally see that skeptical as well, whether you can verify it. And this is exactly why we have this parameter, this verifiability parameter in there. So your stance would be, okay, well, there's no or hardly any verifiability. So we're close to gamma half in the model, say, okay, where verifiability is extremely low. Gamma half would be no verifiability at all. And it's interesting. I mean, there's when I talk about this, there's people saying, you know, coming up with different perspectives. When I present this at other universities. So, for example, I was at Humboldt University once, and Michael Burda, for example, said, sure, it's no problem. We just insure the people, right? So it's different opinions on it. And this is exactly which I find it very hard to put a precise number on it, right? How verifiable it is. I would argue to a certain degree it is, because you can see what the firms did and whether they adopted the technology or not. So I would argue there is a certain degree of it, but how much it really is, we're agnostic about this, and this is exactly why you have this parameter in there. So you can read this paper. So we're not taking a stance and saying this is a great thing. What we're saying is, well, if you have sufficient verifiability, then you want to do that. Okay, and it's an empirical issue how much you've got that. Yes, so then with the policies and with the capital tax and the closed versus open economy. Yes, so if you think about the mechanism that we have, you could go and say, yeah, sure, the capital, the capital goes somewhere else, okay? And in that way, that closed economy model doesn't really capture the mechanism there. But then where does the capital go, right? Well, it might go to the US, it might go to other places, it might go to China, but they're developing the same type of technology, right? So I would argue it's not a country-specific technology if we're talking about AI, and that might be also something that might be to a certain degree new. So by having an international perspective, I don't think the mechanism will go away. It might drive it then somewhere else. But I agree with you. But I agree with you. The capital tax. So if you want to solve the problem as a single country, you can't. And in that way, yes, I completely agree that an international perspective is needed if you really want to solve it. But the problems would be similar in other countries. I would strongly argue. Okay, and then there is the point, and that's very interesting. I'm glad that you brought that up about the reskilling and the education. And that, yes, we can have this redistribution, but then efforts might go down to reskill. And the flexibility of the people, we might constrain the flexibility of the people in adapting to the new environment, right? And we fully agree. And that's exactly why we're working on reskilling now, because I think that's really a key point. I mean, here you can argue, okay, well, look, it's certainly the case. I would argue that yes, people will get displaced from AI, and they might not be able to reskill themselves. But many people will. So you still have this problem. But to what degree are you reducing reskilling incentives by these very policies that we've been discussing? And that's a very interesting topic, and that's exactly the topic of this paper we're working currently on. And you have exactly that trade-off then between, yes, how much do I want to invest in reskilling? And do I want to reskill? And it's not that clear. It depends on how big your wage is if you fell down. So the way we look at it is, and that's also that's why it's so interesting. And there's hardly any literature there about reskilling, really, or if you know,
especially for the.
Sorry, can we also let some others of the audience?
Yeah, just that point on how we look at reskilling. So, and that's exactly what you mentioned as well, which is really interesting. So you can here in this model, you can think about, okay, should I invest more in education when I'm young, in the first period, to reduce the probability that I'm going down or up? So increase probability I'm going up, reduce it that I'm going down.
When you lose more.
Well, you can think about this, right? Whether you want to do this or not. You might, to a certain degree, or, and that's the alternative, and that's what we do now, is to say, okay, well, what if, for now, leaving that out, I think it would be great to have both in, but for now, leaving that out, suppose you give the people a reskilling opportunity when they've dropped down. So then they can invest in reskilling and with a certain probability move their way up. Okay, because now they can work as well, maybe in a complementary way, and that's what we're working on. And then yes, you have, if you reduce the inequality, then you reduce the incentives to invest in reskilling, but it's not like it depends. So the way we look at it is, yes, you go reskilling, and then you have a certain probability that you move to a high wage. Okay, but that probability isn't 100%. It's might be 80.
I think we have
maybe 6%.
People get
empirically
to look more and more dire.
Yeah, exactly. But
we have only 3 minutes left, and I think that from the audience also wants to say
yes, of course. So yes, it's an interesting problem with the reskilling.
The feedback a little bit about this investment.
Yes. But what I want to say is that the trade-off is between reducing the inequality and providing incentives, and that's a very standard trade-off in public economics, and it's in there as well. And it's interesting to tease it out, and there are some interesting results we think we're producing there, and I think it's a very relevant topic. I completely agree.
Okay, Thomas, do you want to say something?
Yeah. If I understood correctly, then the main mechanism that creates this uncertainty is the complementarity substitutability mechanism. And I think if that's the main mechanism, it should be optimal to address your policy instrument towards this market failure and not towards something that's happened in the background afterwards. So this reskilling is, I think, the main point that you should focus your interest in. The other thing is, why not investing as a government if you are starting to collect taxes and spend your money? Why do you not invest in increasing, for example, the verification probability?
The education
verification probability.
Oh yes. Mm-hmm.
So because this also would make everything cheaper and more targeted.
Yes, of course.
I don't think that this is, if you have technical progress and AI, it should be possible to improve your verification technology.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Another point, in Europe, I think we do something to protect our citizens from data misuse. I think about this data protection regulation, but this if you don't have this single country OEG model, but two-country model, where one country model suppresses technological progress by regulation, the progress happens elsewhere, and then all the savings goes there, and you still have the same problems, but you don't benefit from it.
Absolutely. Yes.
So this might be an interesting issue that you could pick up.
Mm-hmm.
Another point that's mentioned by Markus, what happens if you have a shrinking population in your OEG model? That's something we all expect.
Yeah.
It will change something.
Yeah, I mean, so with the shrinking population, ultimately you're increasing the wages, you're reducing N, but the core problem is that what kind of skills do they have? So that probability of being displaced or not, it will happen just in a smaller population, basically. So the average wages will go up because there's less labor supply, right? But the inequality in our model, you still have a probability P that you're being replaced. It's just the share. It's just you're just shrinking the model basically with the population size a little bit, but in principle the core mechanism would still be there.
My last point: you have a one good economy.
Yeah,
it's called Douglas production function, I think. And if we think about the growth models, most of those have a variety of models with some taste for variety. And this kind of model also gives the opportunity to have a shift in the demand from, let's say, knowledge or capital-intensive goods towards labor-intensive goods, and that's also what Acemoglu does with his task-based modeling strategy. You have always new tasks which are more labor-intensive than the ones that have been replaced.
Yeah.
And I think you need something like this if you want to integrate this task-based.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, this is like so what we've done, because we wanted to focus on the uncertainty on the household side, we have a very reduced form production side, but you can spread it out and basically make it bigger and bring exactly these things in, and that's what I meant with like future research. I don't think it's going to change the key mechanism, because if you think of like the endogenous growth models that you've mentioned. The technological progress, endogenous technological progress, is driven by investment still. And yes, you can say, okay, well, I'm investing with labor potentially, but ultimately, if you have capital in the model, then capital typically drives your economic growth, because you have a higher incentive. If you produce with capital, typically you produce intermediates with capital to a certain degree. Then if capital is cheaper, you can produce more, and that increases your R&D incentives. And then again, if the speed of technological progress increases, your probability of displacement goes up. So I think that you can bring in these more complicated production sides with the same mechanism, but it makes things more complicated. And we want to go that way because these models are interesting also with respect to reskilling, we think, because if you think about tasks, and you might want to think, okay, well, in what types of tasks do I want to specialize? And where do I want to reskill into, right? And then you might also have an uncertainty as to whether you might be replaced later. And that trade-off between uncertainty and your education decisions, we find is very interesting. And I think that's where we need a bigger model as well. And yes, thank you very much for your comments. I think they were great. I agree on them. Invest in verification probability, absolutely. That's what you want to do. If you want to go for the insurance, then yes. I mean, depends of course on how you model it, how much you have to invest to reduce the verification probability, how tough it is. It's a technological issue, but AI might help there as well. I think we could discuss this in our framework. And the international dimension, I completely agree. It was mentioned a little bit before. If one country stops technological progress, but the other goes ahead, well, the products will typically come in as well, and they will have the inequality, but they're not benefiting from the technological progress. So, as we mentioned before, it needs to have a global agreement on capital tax if you want to go down that route.
But it was not one of your topics that one country does not allow this technological progress. This was out of scope of you.
Well, you would
be suppressing it. This was not.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I do think that to a certain degree, there is, say, a certain desire by the population for, slower technological progress. So I don't think this is completely out of thin air. And
it should be a separate paper, not institute.
Yeah. Especially with international.
You can all discuss later or discuss over lunch. But I will close the session now. Thank you very much for your talk. Marcus, thank you very much for your comment. And I also thank the audience.